There was a man once, just like you, just like me. A man who could take a wrench to anything broken and bring it back humming. A man whose hands knew the language of steel and grease better than most folks knew their own address. He'd spent a lifetime learning to fix things, to build things, to keep the big gears of the world turning. He'd learned the how of it all, down to the last nut and bolt. And for a long time, he figured that was all there was to it. That mastery, that knowing how, that was the prize. But he was wrong, because the hardest thing he ever had to fix wasn't a machine or a broken part. It was the whisper in his own head, the one that kept telling him he wasn't good enough. The real truth, the one they never put in the manuals, is that mastering doubt, that's a damn sight harder than mastering any skill. Eugene, he was that kind of man, 48 years old. And the quiet strength of him was carved right into the lines around his eyes, the slight stoop in his shoulders from years of leaning over machines, of lifting, of bending. He looked like a man who'd seen his share of sunrises from the factory parking lot, a man who knew the precise weight of a day's work in his bones. His hands, calloused and crisscrossed with faded scars, were the hands of a mechanic, a craftsman. They could coax a temperamental press back to life with a touch, strip down an assembly line motor blindfolded. But those same hands, when idle, often rested in his lap, fidgeting, almost as if searching for something to fix that wasn't right there in front of him. His world began with the shrill insistency of an alarm clock at 5 a.m., rattling the silence of their small, well-maintained house in the blue-collar stretch of town. The house, built in the 70s, had seen better decades, but Sarah kept it clean, a haven against the grit of Eugene's working life. He'd swing his feet to the worn rug beside the bed, the familiar ache in his lower back a morning greeting. The smell of coffee was already brewing, a ritual Sarah started before she even heard his feet hit the floor. He'd sit at the kitchen table, scarred from decades of family meals, sipping his mug, the only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of a garbage truck. He'd glance at the neatly stacked pile of bills on the counter, electric, water, Michael's college loan payment that still needed a little extra help, Emily's tuition fund. Every number await, every due date a quiet reminder of his place, his purpose, to provide. The drive to the factory was a blur of familiar streets, the sky turning from bruised purple to dull gray. The plant itself was a beast of corrugated steel and concrete, perpetually exhaling the metallic tang of oil and the rhythmic thrum of unseen engines. Inside, it was a symphony of industry, the shriek of grinders, the hiss of pneumatic lines, the steady clatter of conveyor belts. For Eugene, this cacophony was his language. He moved through it with the ease of a fish in water, heading straight for the oldest, most cantankerous machines, the ones that often coughed and sputtered through the night shift. He was the plant's silent doctor, diagnosing woes by sound alone, his movements precise, economical, born of thousands of hours of repetition. He fixed what broke, he kept things running, and he did it without fuss, without fanfare. He was dependable, a rock, always there. But beneath that quiet, dependable surface, a different kind of engine sputtered, a different set of gears jammed. It was the constant, low hum of self-doubt. It was a well Eugene had been digging for himself since he was a young man, each shovel of hesitation adding to its depth. He was a master of his craft, no doubt about it. He knew every bolt, every wire, every stress point in the factory's aging machinery. He could build, he could repair, he could invent solutions on the fly. Yet the moment the conversation turned from hydraulics to human resources, from torque to team leadership, a cold dread would seize him. He'd always wanted more, a spark of something beyond the daily grind, a faint, flickering desire he usually managed to smother with the practicalities of life. He saw the ambitious young engineers, fresh out of college, talking about efficiency models and leadership pathways, and a voice in his head would immediately retort, "That's not you, Eugene. You're good with your hands, not with people. Not with big ideas." He saw the factory manager, a man who started on the floor just like him, walk by with a confident stride, talking strategy, and Eugene would shrink a little inside, whispering to himself, "He's got the charisma. He's got the smarts for the paperwork. You don't." Promotions had come his way over the years, subtle nudges from supervisors who recognized his unparalleled technical skill. A shift lead position, a proposal to head up a new maintenance training program. Each time he'd find a way to deflect, to politely decline, to subtly sabotage the opportunity. He'd mumble about being happier on the tools, about not being a talker, about how someone else would be better suited for the management side of things. Inside, it wasn't humility, it was a paralyzing fear of failure. He believed with every fiber of his being that if he stepped beyond his direct, familiar tasks, beyond the tangible, fixable world of machines, he would be exposed. He would stumble. He would fall. And the weight of that potential fall, the shame of not being good enough, felt heavier than any gear he'd ever lifted. His loyalty to his work was fierce, his persistence unwavering once he committed to a task. But that commitment rarely extended to himself, to his own potential. The deepest well in Eugene wasn't the grease pit. It was the chasm between who he was and who he quietly, desperately, sometimes wished he could be. And that chasm was dug by doubt. The hum of the old machines, a familiar lullaby for decades, was slowly being replaced by the sleek, almost silent whir of something new. It started as a rumor, then a memo, then crates arriving on flatbeds marked with strange foreign symbols. Automation. The word itself felt like a chill wind blowing through the plant, threatening to extinguish the warmth of old habits, old ways. For Eugene, it was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the intellectual challenge of learning a new system, understanding its intricate logic and delicate mechanics, was a puzzle his hands and mind instinctively craved. He devoured manuals, stayed late, asked the young engineers questions until their eyes glazed over. He became adept, surprisingly quickly, at navigating the touchscreens and programming the robotic arms, just another extension of his unmatched skill with anything mechanical. But the new systems weren't just about fixing. They were about integrating, about teaching, about leading a complete overhaul of the factory's nervous system. And that's where the cold dread truly set in. His supervisor, Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was etched with the stress of quarterly reports, pulled him aside one Tuesday morning, the clanging symphony of the production line momentarily muted by the gravity of his words. "Eugene," he'd begun, his voice low, "you're the only one here who's truly grasped this. We need you to head up the training for your shift. Show them the ropes. Get them comfortable. We're all looking to you." Eugene felt the blood drain from his face, a familiar clammy cold creeping up his spine. Head up training. Speak in front of people. Guide them. The words caught in his throat, a silent scream of, "I can't." Echoing in his mind, he stammered something about being better with the machines themselves, about not being much of a talker. But Henderson just clapped him on the shoulder, a forced smile playing on his lips. "Eugene, you're invaluable. You've got this." And then the real crack appeared, not in a machine, but in the carefully constructed wall around his own doubt. He saw it in Frank's eyes, a man who'd worked beside him for 20 years, whose kids grew up with his own. Frank, who looked at the new control panel like it was an alien spaceship, his brow furrowed with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. He saw it in Maria, a young single mother whose job depended on learning these new systems, her usual cheerful chatter replaced by a nervous silence. He saw the genuine, raw fear in their faces, the quiet desperation that mirrored his own, but for entirely different reasons. Their fear wasn't about being exposed as a fraud. It was about losing their livelihoods, about not being able to provide for their families. And in that moment, something shifted. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the dam of his self-doubt. His fear, which had always been a personal, internal monster, suddenly seemed selfish. It wasn't just holding him back anymore, it was holding them back. His paralysis, his refusal to step up, wasn't just about his own comfort, it was putting their future at risk. The weight of that realization, heavy and sharp, settled deep in his gut. He was the one who understood. He was the one who could help. And yet he was still hiding. That night the house was a tomb. Sarah was deep in sleep beside him, her breathing soft and even. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed a stark, unforgiving 3:17 a.m. Eugene lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the Venetian blinds cutting harsh lines across the plaster. The factory's mechanical hum had been replaced by the deafening roar of his own thoughts. What has his life become? 50 years old, nearly. And still that same old fear, that nagging voice, still holding him captive. He pictured Frank's terrified eyes, Maria's worried frown. He replayed Henderson's words. "We're all looking to you." He knew the systems. He knew them. He could troubleshoot them blindfolded. He could explain them patiently, logically, because that's how his mind worked. So why couldn't he do it? Why did the idea of standing up and speaking fill him with such suffocating dread? Got out of bed, careful not to disturb Sarah, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The linoleum was cool under his feet. He poured himself a glass of water, the mundane act a stark contrast to the turmoil in his head. He leaned against the counter, the silence of the house amplifying the brutal honesty of his own self-interrogation. He saw the faded lines on his hands, the calluses from decades of work, Hands that had fixed countless machines, saved the plant from untold breakdowns. Competent hands, reliable hands, but his mind was a tangled mess of what if and you can't. All those years, all those missed opportunities, the promotions he'd deflected, the chances to grow, to lead, to have more than just this quiet, predictable, slightly worn-out life. He'd blamed it on not being the type, on being happier with his hands. But tonight, in the chilling quiet of his own kitchen, he admitted the real truth. It wasn't about happiness or preference. It was about fear. A paralyzing, soul-crushing fear of falling short, of being exposed as the inadequate man he secretly believed himself to be. He'd built a life around avoiding that moment, around staying safe in his expertise, never venturing beyond the familiar. And now that carefully constructed prison of comfort was threatening to collapse, taking his friends down with it. The water tasted bitter in his mouth. He was tired. Not just physically, but deep in his bones, tired of being held hostage by himself. The bitterness clung to his tongue, a taste he knew too well now. It was the flavor of regret, of quiet concessions made over decades, each surrender a tiny chip from the monument of the man he'd once hoped to be. He stood there in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and for the first time, truly, irrevocably, he heard himself. Not the excuses, not the self-deprecating humor, not the comforting lie of, "This is just who I am." No, he heard the raw, bleeding truth. He was a coward. The word stung, a hot brand on his soul, but he didn't flinch from it. Coward, because what else was it if not cowardice that had kept him pinned beneath the weight of his own doubts for so long? What else had whispered in his ear, day after day, year after year, convincing him he wasn't enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't quick enough, wasn't anything enough to step outside the narrow, familiar groove he'd carved for himself? It wasn't just about his job, not anymore. It was about his life. The life he was living, the man he had become, a man who let fear dictate every significant turn, every potential ascent. And now that fear wasn't just suffocating him, it was casting a long, dark shadow over the faces of the men and women he worked alongside, men and women who looked to him, even unknowingly, for a steady hand, a reassuring presence. He looked out the window at the barely visible silhouette of his own modest home against the pre-dawn sky. It was a good home, a safe home, a testament to his hard work. But what about the man inside it? Was he good? Was he safe, truly? Or was he just small? Small in his ambitions, small in his courage, small in his willingness to fight for more than just the status quo. A profound wave of exhaustion washed over him, deeper than any fatigue from a double shift. It was the weariness of a soul that had fought itself for too long, of a spirit that had consistently lost the internal battle. "Enough!" he whispered into the silence, the word feeling foreign on his tongue, yet undeniably powerful. It wasn't a question, not an angry shout. It was a statement. A quiet, resolute declaration from the depths of his being. Enough of the whispers, enough of the hesitation, enough of letting that poisonous voice in his head dictate his worth, his potential, his very future. He didn't know how to stop it, didn't have a grand plan for conquering his self-doubt. He only knew with a certainty that chilled him and warmed him at the same time that he couldn't continue living this way. He couldn't, not anymore. The thought settled in his chest, a heavy, unyielding stone, but this time it felt like ballast, not burden. It was a silent vow made to himself under the watchful, indifferent gaze of the sleeping neighborhood. When the 5 a.m. alarm finally shrieked, it felt less like a jolt and more like a cue. Eugene opened his eyes, the pre-dawn gloom still clinging to the corners of the room, but something inside him had shifted. The usual dread, the familiar weight of another monotonous day, was there, a dull ache behind his eyes, but it was accompanied by a new, almost imperceptible tremor, a flicker of resolve. He swung his legs out of bed, the familiar stiffness in his joints a reminder of his 48 years, but today he pushed through it with a different kind of purpose. Breakfast was a blur of routine, coffee, toast, the morning news droning softly from the living room. Sarah, still half asleep, mumbled a question about his plans for the day. "Training," he simply replied, not meeting her eyes. He didn't want to explain the seismic shift that had occurred within him, not yet. Not until he knew if it was real, if this quiet, newfound courage wouldn't crumble the moment he stepped foot into the lion's den. The drive to the factory was a blur of familiar streets, the worn steering wheel warm under his calloused hands. Every stoplight seemed to be a flashing red warning, every familiar turn a signpost pointing him back to the safety of routine. The voice, his old companion, was back, louder than ever. "You're too old for this, Eugene. What makes you think you can teach anyone? You'll just embarrass yourself. Let the younger guys handle it. You're a fixer, not a leader. It jabbed at him, a relentless drumbeat against his resolve. His palms sweated. He gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. This was it. This was the real work. Not the new software, not the blinking lights and complex diagrams of the automated machinery. The real work was happening right here, right now, in the battlefield of his own skull. He pulled into his usual spot, the faint smell of oil and metal already in the air. He sat for a moment, engine idling, watching other workers stream towards the entrance, their faces a mixture of apprehension and resignation. He saw Jimmy, a man he'd worked with for 20 years, his shoulders slumped. He saw Maria, a single mother, her brow furrowed with worry. Their faces flashed before his eyes, a silent plea. It was like looking into a mirror, reflecting his own deepest fears, but also for the first time reflecting a responsibility he could no longer shirk. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Eugene killed the engine. The silence in the cab was deafening, amplifying the riot in his mind. Turn back, Eugene. Just call in sick. Say you can't. You're not cut out for this. The fear was a physical presence, a cold hand on his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. His hand hovered over the door handle, trembling slightly. This was it. The moment of truth. Would he succumb to the familiar comfort of retreat, or would he take that painful, terrifying first step? He closed his eyes, picturing the terrified faces of his coworkers, then the confident, unwavering stare of the younger engineers who would replace them if they failed to adapt. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. With a grunt that was half exertion, half defiance, he pushed the door open. Each day for the next few weeks felt like pulling a stubborn root out of concrete. The first few days after that initial brave step were a blur of frustration and self-flagellation. He'd sit in front of the flickering screen, the new automation software glaring back at him with its sleek, unfamiliar interface. Buttons and menus, symbols that spoke a language he barely understood. It felt like trying to read ancient hieroglyphs after a lifetime of knowing only English. See, the voice in his head would whisper, sharp as a drill bit. Told ya, you're too old for this, Eugene. Too slow. This ain't your world. He'd spend hours poring over the manuals, his brow furrowed so deep it looked like a permanent canyon had formed between his eyes. The younger engineers, sharp as tacks and quick with a keyboard, would glide past, sometimes offering a quick, "Need a hand, Eugene?" He'd just nod, a tight knot in his stomach, and mutter something about just figuring it out. Pride, stubborn as a rusty bolt, kept him from admitting how truly lost he felt. Teaching was even worse. He knew the old machines inside and out, could trace every wire, feel every vibration. But explaining this abstract dance of code and logic, he'd try to show Jimmy or Maria how to input a command, how to read the data flow, and the words would get tangled in his throat. He'd see their eyes, wide with confusion, mirroring his own. And then came the crushing wave of guilt. He wasn't just failing himself, he was failing them. One afternoon, late in the first week, he made a colossal blunder. A seemingly simple sequence of commands went haywire, causing a critical section of the line to shut down. Not a dangerous error, but a costly one, idling half a dozen men for an hour while a younger tech had to come in and untangle his mess. The tech was polite, almost too polite, but Eugene felt every pair of eyes on him, a silent judgment that sliced deeper than any shouted insult. Stood there, hands useless at his sides, watching the kid punch keys with practiced ease, undoing Eugene's mistake in minutes. That night he came home, the smell of burnt toast from Sarah's late dinner hitting him like a physical blow. He just sat at the kitchen table, staring at his calloused hands. Hands that could build, repair, troubleshoot almost anything. Hands that now felt clumsy and capable. Sarah saw it, the slump in his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes. She didn't need to ask. She just brought him a cup of coffee, set it down, and squeezed his shoulder before going back to her crossword. He wanted to quit. God, how he wanted to quit. The thought hammered at him. Just go back to his old job, even if it meant fewer hours, less pay, less dignity. Let the young ones take over. Let the fear win. It would be easier, so much easier. He could just tell Mr. Henderson that he wasn't cut out for it, that he was too old, that he tried his best, but it wasn't enough. No shame in that, right? Plenty of men retreated. But then he'd remember Jimmy's worried gaze, Maria's tight lips as she talked about her kids' school fees. He'd remember the spark of hope that had briefly flickered in his own chest that morning, the stubborn belief that he could do this, that he had to. It was a promise unspoken to himself and to them. The next morning, day 7, he dragged himself out of bed, the exhaustion not just physical but deep in his bones. He felt like he was running a marathon against an opponent he couldn't see, constantly tripping over his own 2 feet. He knew he'd make more mistakes. He knew he'd feel that familiar flush of shame. But something had shifted ever so slightly in the long, dark hours before dawn. He might fail again, but he wouldn't stop trying. Not yet. Not while there was still breath in his body. He'd pick himself up, dust himself off, and put one foot in front of the other, just like he always had. It wasn't about becoming a genius overnight. It was about not letting the doubt become a wall. It was about showing up, again, and again, and again. He wasn't mastering the machines yet, not fully. But he was slowly, painstakingly, mastering the voice that told him he couldn't. It was a quiet, internal battle, waged in the silence of his own mind, every single grueling minute of every single day. Day 20 crept into day 21, then day 25. The endless internal wrestling match continued, but something was subtly changing in the arena of Eugene's mind. He was still making mistakes. Yes, the clunky new interface still threw him for a loop sometimes, but the sting of failure didn't last as long. He'd mutter a curse, reread the manual, try again, and sometimes, often enough now to matter, it would click. A sequence would make sense, a bug would reveal its logic, and a quiet current of satisfaction, not pride, but pure, unadulterated relief would run through him. Others started to notice. Jimmy, who used to hover nervously, now asked Eugene questions with a hint of genuine curiosity, not just fear. Maria, whose initial attempts had been halting and full of dread, found herself standing beside Eugene at a console, listening intently as he calmly walked her through a diagnostic, his finger tracing lines on the screen. He wasn't booming orders, wasn't putting on a show. He was just there, patiently explaining, problem-solving, his focus absolute. The quiet strength that had always been present in his hands now seemed to radiate from his very presence. The fear in his coworkers' eyes didn't vanish entirely. Fear rarely does, but it was replaced by a sense of shared purpose and a quiet trust. One afternoon, Mr. Henderson, the plant manager, walked by Eugene's station. He paused, watching Eugene deftly navigate a complex troubleshooting sequence on one of the new robotic arms. Eugene felt the familiar prickle of anxiety, the old voice whispering, "He's watching, you're gonna mess up." But this time, the voice was a murmur, not a shout. He took a breath, kept his hands steady, and finished the task. Mr. Henderson simply nodded, a slow, appraising nod, and walked on. It wasn't praise, not a pat on the back, but Eugene felt it deep in his bones. Recognition. He hadn't just mastered a machine, he was mastering himself. He was showing up day after grueling day, not just with his skills, but with his courage, bruised but unbroken. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Eugene wasn't the factory's newest hotshot, nor its most charismatic leader. He was still Eugene, the man with the quiet strength, the worn hands, the eyes that had seen too much but now held a steady, observant light. But he was different. He moved with a new kind of confidence, not boisterous or flashy, but deeply rooted, like an old oak tree that knows its place. When a complex automation issue stumped the younger engineers, it was Eugene they called. He'd walk over, listen patiently, then lean in, point to a terminal, and in his low, steady voice, suggest a solution that often proved correct. He didn't claim credit, he just solved the problem. He found himself not just teaching the systems, but explaining them, finding simple analogies from the old mechanical world to bridge the gap for his older colleagues. He'd talk about a hydraulic valve being like a digital gate, or a conveyor belt jam being similar to a data bottleneck. He became the plant's quiet interpreter, the bridge between the past and the future. At home, Sarah noticed it too. He wasn't coming home as heavy with dread, wasn't sighing so much over dinner. One evening, as he fixed a leaky faucet he'd been putting off for months, humming under his breath, Sarah watched him from the kitchen doorway. "You seem lighter, honey," she said, her voice soft. He turned, a faint smile on his lips. "Yeah, I guess so, Sarah Bear." Turns out the toughest thing to fix wasn't any machine out there. It was the one in here. He tapped his temple. "That old ticker, it tells you all kinds of stories, mostly bad ones. Been telling me for years I wasn't good enough, not for more than what I had. But you know what? It's a liar. A damn good one, but a liar all the same." He wasn't free of doubt. That voice, that familiar whisper of inadequacy, still tried to creep in, especially when a new challenge arose. But now, when it spoke, Eugene didn't listen. He heard it, acknowledged it, then kept moving. He understood now that doubt wasn't a stop sign, it was just noise. A constant companion, perhaps, but one he no longer allowed to drive the bus. He had learned to act despite it, to lead with it, to build a future, even as that small, nagging voice suggested the whole thing might come crashing down. He had finally learned that the most important skill wasn't knowing how to fix a circuit board or program a robot. It was knowing how to fix his own mind when it tried to betray him. And so, my friends, that's the real cruel twist about success. The one nobody ever bothers to tell you when they're talking about ambition and dreams. It ain't about how good your hands are or how sharp your mind is, not really. You can know everything there is to know, have all the skills in the world. But if you don't trust yourself to use them, to step up, to just do the damn thing, it don't mean a damn thing. The real work ain't with your hands. It's with your head, shutting up that voice